The rain was so heavy I could barely see the front gate when my husband threw my suitcase onto the driveway and looked me in the eyes without a trace of guilt. Then he said the sentence that shattered 20 years of marriage. "I only needed you to take care of my mother while she was sick. Now you're no longer useful." The front door slammed behind me before I could answer. I stood there soaked, homeless, and heartbroken, until I remembered something his mother had whispered to me just 3 days before she passed away. That secret would change everything. My name is Emma Parker, and I was 45 years old the day I realized my 20-year marriage had never meant the same thing to my husband as it did to me. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs. At the time, I called them sacrifices people made for love. I met Daniel when we were both 25. He was ambitious, charming, and determined to build a successful career in commercial real estate. I was an elementary school teacher who believed happiness came from kindness, family, and quiet evenings together. We balanced each other, or at least I believed we did. As the years passed, Daniel worked longer hours while I quietly held our life together. I never complained. I packed his lunches, remembered birthdays, managed our home, and celebrated every promotion he earned as if it belonged to both of us. 5 years before everything collapsed, Daniel's mother, Margaret, became seriously ill. Her doctors said she would need constant care. Daniel sat beside me one evening, held my hand, and asked me to leave my teaching job. "It's only temporary," he promised. "When Mom gets better, we'll rebuild everything together." I believed him without hesitation. I walked away from the career I loved and devoted every day to Margaret. I drove her to appointments, organized medications, cooked every meal, and stayed awake through nights when her pain refused to let her sleep. Daniel visited whenever work allowed, but most days it was just Margaret and me. She often squeezed my hand and whispered, "You've given me more kindness than I ever deserved." 3 days before she passed away, she asked everyone else to leave the room. Her voice was weak, but her eyes were clear. "Emma," she whispered, "I'm sorry for what my son has become. I've made arrangements so you'll never be left with nothing." I didn't understand what she meant. 3 days after Margaret's funeral, Daniel handed me divorce papers. Then he looked at me without emotion and said, "I only needed you to care for my mother while she was sick. Now you're no longer useful." He threw my suitcase into the pouring rain, locked the front door behind me, and walked away. Then my phone started ringing. My phone continued ringing as the rain soaked through my clothes. The screen displayed David Reynolds, Margaret's attorney. I answered with trembling hands. "Emma," he said gently, "I know this is a difficult day, but Mrs. Parker left very specific instructions. She asked me to contact you immediately after her funeral if certain events occurred. Can you come to my office this afternoon?" An hour later, I sat across from him, still wearing borrowed clothes after changing at a nearby hotel. "I'm sorry for your loss," he began. "Margaret cared deeply about you." I forced a weak smile. I thought she just wanted me to have a keepsake. David slowly opened a thick folder. Actually, 6 months before she passed away, Margaret updated part of her estate plan. My heart skipped. "I don't understand." He slid a handwritten letter across the desk. "This is for you." The first line stole my breath. "Emma, if you're reading this, then my greatest fear has come true." Tears blurred the page as I continued. Margaret wrote that during her illness, she had watched me sacrifice my career, my independence, and my future without asking for anything in return. She said I treated her with love, while her own son treated my devotion as something he could simply expect. She admitted she had quietly noticed Daniel becoming colder over the years. "I realized," she wrote, "that my son had begun seeing you as someone useful instead of someone precious." My chest tightened. I prayed I was wrong, but I prepared in case I wasn't. David waited until I finished reading before speaking again. Margaret legally transferred several personal assets that belonged only to her. He handed me another folder. Inside were property records for a beautiful lakeside cottage she had inherited from her sister decades earlier. There were also investment accounts worth far more than I could have imagined. "Daniel has no legal claim to any of this," David explained calmly. Margaret made certain everything was properly documented. For the first time since Daniel threw me out, I felt something other than heartbreak. I felt seen. As I stood to leave, David reached into his desk and placed one final sealed envelope in my hands. Across the front, in Margaret's handwriting, were 7 unforgettable words. Open only if Daniel asks for forgiveness. 2 weeks later, I unlocked the front door of the little lakeside cottage Margaret had left me. The house wasn't enormous, but it was peaceful. Morning sunlight poured through the windows, birds gathered near the water, and for the first time in years, I woke without wondering whether someone else needed me before I needed myself. I slowly unpacked my boxes and hung my old teaching certificates on the living room wall. A month later, I accepted a teaching position at a private elementary school only 15 minutes away. Walking back into a classroom felt like reclaiming a part of myself I thought was gone forever. Meanwhile, Daniel seemed convinced life would continue exactly as he had planned. It didn't. Margaret's longtime financial advisor contacted him regarding several personal expenses Margaret had quietly covered over the years. Without her support, those obligations became Daniel's responsibility. Then he learned she had legally changed multiple beneficiary designations months before her passing. The inheritance he had always assumed would automatically be his simply wasn't. Word also spread through our extended family. My sister told everyone how Daniel had thrown me out only days after his own mother's funeral. One by one, relatives stopped defending him. Several quietly reached out to apologize for believing his version of events before hearing mine. Without me managing the house, paying bills on time, scheduling repairs, and remembering every important detail, Daniel's carefully organized life began falling apart. The man who once believed I was no longer useful suddenly discovered how much I had been carrying alone. 6 weeks after our divorce papers were filed, someone knocked on my front door. I looked through the window. Daniel stood on the porch. He looked exhausted. His expensive suit was wrinkled, dark circles surrounded his eyes, and the confidence that had once defined him was nowhere to be found. "I just want to talk," he said quietly when I opened the door a few inches. "I've made the biggest mistake of my life." I didn't answer. I simply listened as he apologized for the first time since our marriage began unraveling. When he finally finished speaking, I remembered the sealed envelope Margaret had asked me to open only if this exact moment ever came. Without saying a word, I walked to my desk, picked it up, and carefully broke the seal. My fingers trembled as I unfolded Margaret's letter. The paper carried the faint scent of lavender, the perfume she had worn for as long as I'd known her. The first sentence brought tears to my eyes. "My dear Emma, if Daniel is standing before you asking for another chance, remember this. He is not standing there because he finally understands your worth. He is standing there because he has finally experienced your absence." I paused and looked through the window. Daniel stood quietly on the porch, his shoulders slumped, staring at the ground. I continued reading. For years I prayed my son would become the kind, dependable man his father was. Instead, I watched him slowly mistake loyalty for obligation and love for convenience. I wanted to believe he would change before it was too late. I was wrong. A lump formed in my throat. Margaret's handwriting became slightly shakier near the bottom of the page. "Please don't confuse guilt with love. Guilt arrives when people lose something valuable. Love exists long before anything is lost." I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Then I opened the door. Daniel looked up hopefully. "Emma, please. I've had time to think. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I'll spend the rest of my life making it right. We can go to counseling. We can start over. I'll leave work if I have to. I'll do whatever you ask." I looked at the man I had loved for 20 years. Months earlier, I would have believed every word. Now I believe his actions instead. "I forgive you, Daniel," I said softly. His eyes filled with relief. "But forgiveness isn't the same as going back." His smile disappeared. "I spent years proving my love through sacrifice," I continued. "You only realized my value after I was gone. That's not the foundation of a marriage. That's regret." He lowered his head. "I'm too late, aren't I?" I nodded gently. "Yes." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Daniel whispered, "I'm truly sorry." "I know," I replied. He turned, walked slowly down the path, and disappeared beyond the gate, without looking back. As I closed the door, sadness lingered in my heart. But for the first time in years, it was no longer carrying the weight of hope. Only peace remained. 6 months after Daniel walked away from my cottage, I received a letter that made me smile through unexpected tears. It came from a hospice where Margaret had spent her final weeks. Inside was an invitation to attend a small dedication ceremony. When I arrived, the director welcomed me warmly. "We've been waiting to meet you," she said. She explained that months before Margaret passed away, she had quietly donated part of her personal savings to create a caregiver support program. There was only one condition. She wanted it named after the woman who had shown her what compassion truly looked like. I stood speechless as they unveiled a simple plaque. The Margaret Wilson Family Caregiver Program. Beneath the title were words Margaret had written herself. Dedicated to Emma Parker, whose kindness reminded me that family is defined by love, not obligation. I couldn't hold back my tears. Everything I had sacrificed had mattered to someone. After the ceremony, the hospice director invited me to volunteer as a mentor for families caring for aging loved ones. I accepted without hesitation. Each week I met husbands, wives, daughters, and sons carrying the same emotional weight I once carried. Instead of feeling trapped by those memories, I found purpose in them. A year later, I stood beside the lake behind my cottage as the sun disappeared beneath the horizon. The water reflected shades of gold and orange, calm after a long day. I thought about Daniel for only a moment before my thoughts returned to Margaret. She hadn't simply left me a cottage or financial security. She had given me the chance to rebuild a life based on respect instead of sacrifice. For years, I believed losing my marriage meant losing my future. I was wrong. Sometimes life closes one door because it knows we deserve a better one. As I turned toward home, I smiled. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't surviving anymore. I was finally living.